as I was a-walking one morning in May, to view yon fair valleys and mountains so gay. I was thinking on young flowers all going to decay, that bloom around you, bonny, bonny Slieve Gallen braes. 'Tis often I've wondered, my dog and my gun, I've wandered these mountains for joy and for fun, but these days they are now over, and I can no longer stay. So farewell unto you, bonny, bonny Slieve Gallen braes. How often I've wondered, and the sun is in the west, I've roamed hand in hand with the girl I love best, but the hopes of youth are vanished, and I must far away. So farewell unto you, bonny, bonny Slieve Gallen braes. This is a story from Donegal. My grandmother would have heard it, but I didn't learn this version from her. It was from another Irish storyteller, and I so loved it, and I asked one or two of my relatives about it, and they said, oh yes, we're sure we heard it. Older cousins, we're sure we heard it, but I don't remember hearing it in my family. But I loved the story when I read it, and it was collected in Donegal. My mother's grandmother came from Donegal, and it's a beautiful county, but then all of Ireland is beautiful, and so is Scotland, where I live now, so you're welcome, all of you, to come and visit us. Anyway, this is the funeral story that I tell, usually at funerals. And it begins with Brian O'Branigan from Barr-on-Geich in Donegal was the best basket maker in the world. Everyone loved his baskets. Women would fight each other to buy the best baskets when he went to the fairs. He would start at the May Fair, because we celebrate May Day as an ancient tradition, Beltane, going back 4,000 years, going back to Bronze Age actually, and it's been going ever since. And when the Beltane fire is lit, it is the eve of the first fair in Ireland at Ballyclare in my county, County Antrim, and they go on until the last fair of the summer in the autumn, the Puck Fair at Killorglin, when they put up a post, the height of a telegraph pole, and put a platform at the top of it, and they put a white buck goat, male goat with big horns on the platform, and he's there the whole weekend, and people go up and climb up and down and give him feed, and he is the king of the, and they decorate his horns with ribbons. Well, Brian O'Branigan went to all the fairs he could go to. Of course, there's some weekends there's two, and he always worked out which was the best to make money, and he would go and he would sell baskets. But one year, because the weather was bad, there was no willow. There had been bad summers for 3 years, and the willow was getting shorter and less well grown, and so you need long willow rods to make good baskets for the house. The Bretons know it; they make brilliant baskets, and if you don't have good willow, you can't be a basket maker. And Brian O'Branigan was very worried, and so he was walking through the village one day, and one of his neighbours said, "Oh, Brian, what's wrong with you?" He said, "Oh, I'm very depressed. the willow was getting worse every year. They were having very, very wet and cold summers. I don't know how I'm going to survive. And Brian, his neighbour told Brian, go to Glen on Shane, up in the Blue Stack Mountains. I have seen willow growing up in the glens there. Glen on Shane, the glen of the fairies. Surely the fairy people wouldn't be happy if I went and stole their willow. The fairy people are to be avoided. We give them a little room and we don't upset them. But the more and more hungry he got, the more worried he got, the more he decided that he needed to go and harvest that willow. So that autumn he put on his coat and he took a ball of string and a knife and he went up into the mountains and he went to Glen on Shane, the glen of the fairies, and he started cutting willow. And to shorten the story, he cut from morning till night. And in the night or in the late evening, he stood up to carry his willow home and discovered that a mist had come down off the mountain and he couldn't see. And he decided that it was too dangerous to go down the mountain with two big stacks of willow. So he would sit on the willow and wait to see if there would be maybe a clear moment in the mist. And as he sat there, he started to worry about it getting darker. And then he saw a light out of the corner of his eye. And to cut the story short, he went carefully, without the willow, to the light. And when he got to the light, he was very happy because it was a real house. It wasn't some fairy place. It was a real house. And he went to knock the door, and the door opened itself. And he was nervous, but he looked inside, and there was an old man and an old woman, and they were sitting telling stories at the fire. And the woman looked up and said, Brian O'Branigan from Bar on Geich, welcome here. And Brian was amazed. How did they know him? How did they know his name? But he went in, and they made tea, and they told stories, and then they said, Brian, tell us a story. You're drinking our tea, we will give you a bed for the night, but tell us a story. He said, I'm a basket maker, I'm not a storyteller. I can't tell you a story. They said, oh, well, you have to do something then. Go out to the well, fill up that bucket with water, and bring it in, and we will make one more kettle of tea, and then we'll all go to bed. But when Brian went out to get the water, he was very worried that he would spill water, so he was very careful, and he let the water run off the outside of the bucket so that he didn't spill it on the floor. And so to wait for that 2 or 3 minutes, he sat down on the wall of the well, and a gust of wind came and it blew him up into the sky. And it blew him to the north and back again, the south and back again, the east and back again, and then to the west and back again. And he fell down to the earth with a bump beside the well, and there was no bucket. What has happened to the bucket? So he got up to go over to the door to apologise to the woman that something had happened to the bucket. And he went to knock the door, and it opened by itself. And when he looked in, there was a coffin with candles at each corner. And there were people dressed in black, sitting all round the room. And a red-headed woman jumped up from beside the fire and ran over and said, oh, Brian, we're into the story now. I've cut the first bit short. This is the real meat of the story. Brian, you're welcome here. We have been waiting for you. Waiting for me? This is a different house. What is going on? Brian is confused. So he goes into the house, and the woman said, you know, Brian, this is a very sad community. We've lost this, our very nicest neighbour has died on us. And we are trying to give him a wake. We are trying to give him the best send-off. But we can't do it. Oh, says Brian. Yes, she said, which is why we wanted you here. And we hoped you would come. If you would play the fiddle for the dancing, it would be wonderful. Because, did I tell you, this is a very sad community. Last week we had the funeral of our fiddler, Paddy Doherty. He died. So we had a funeral 2 weeks ago of our fiddler. Now we have lost this neighbour. We have no fiddler to play for the dancing at the wake. Would you? And he said, I'm a basket maker. Fiddling, playing music, that's a thing I've never done in all my life. But before the words had properly formed, did a little boy not run up with a fiddle and put it in one hand, and did another little boy not run up with a bow and put it in the other hand, and before he realised what he was doing, he had a fiddle under his chin, and he was playing jigs and hornpipes, reels and slides and Donegal Highlands and all the dances. And the people took partners and danced and danced and danced till they could dance no more. And they all sat down on their chairs, and the two little boys ran up, took the fiddle and the bow and ran off. And there he was. And the woman said, come on, sit down, have a cup of tea. And he sat down with a cup of tea, and he could hear the people saying, sure, if the great fiddler Doherty was still alive, he could not have played the dances as well as Brian O'Branigan from Bar on Geek. That's true. Brian heard them say that. And he thought, am I dreaming? And then the woman said, that was really, really great, Brian. We loved the dancing. She said, did I tell you, but this community is a very sad community. And we're burying this, our very fine neighbour. And 2 weeks ago we buried our great fiddler, Paddy Doherty. But 2 weeks before that, did we not bury our priest? And we have nobody to say the prayers for the dead. So, Brian, would you be kind enough to say the prayers for the dead? And Brian started to say, I'm not a priest. I'm not a clergyman of any kind. I am a basket maker. You see, saying the prayers for the dead or any other liturgy, that's a thing I've never done in all my life. But before he could say it, did one little boy not run up and throw a white sheet over him? Another little boy put a prayer book in his hand, and two men came and put a table in front of him with a white sheet and a cross on it. And was he not standing with the book? And he was reciting the prayers for the dead. And he finished the prayers for the dead. Amen. And the little boys, I should have said there was one little boy there and one little boy there. They were like guardians to stop him running away. But they were altar boys and they knew what to do, so they kept him right. And he did the prayers for the dead. And they took the white sheet away, and they took the table away, and they took the cross away, and they took the prayer book away, and they put him back on the chair with his cup of tea. And Brian was starting to be worried, what's going to happen next? And the red-headed woman said, well, Brian, we'll not ask you to do anything else. That was wonderful. That was just wonderful. But then there was the moment where they would go to the graveyard to put the body in the grave. And so they closed up the coffin, and the four young men who would be pallbearers carrying the coffin came into the room. And there was the three sons of the man in the coffin, his 3 surviving sons. 3 sad boys, tears on their cheeks. Their daddy was going to his grave. And their favourite cousin. Now their favourite cousin was 2 metres tall, and they were just average height. So the difference was half a metre. And the woman ran over to Brian and said, "Brian, I know we told you we didn't need anything else done, but did I tell you that this is a very bad community, that we're burying a very nice neighbour, and 2 weeks ago we buried our fiddler, the great Paddy Doherty, and then 2 weeks before that we buried our priest." But it's worse than that, because 2 weeks before that we buried our doctor. Now, is there any possibility that you would just do one more favour for us? Would you cut half a metre off the legs of that big tall boy and make him the same height as his cousins? And, you know what Brian said. He said, "Mrs., I'm a basket maker. I'm not a doctor. You see, doing surgery or any medical thing, that's a thing I've never done in all my life." But before he had the words fully out, was he not standing there? The table was back. The big boy was lying on top of it in the white sheet, and he had an apron on, and he had a surgeon's saw in his hand from the late doctor, and he's cutting a bit off the leg. And one of the ladies in the company was a nurse, so she sewed the foot back on to the shorter leg. I don't know what they did with the other bit, but they cut he sawed the bits off the leg, they put the feet back on, and they stood the boy up, and he was just 8 millimeters taller than his cousins, which is okay, because you want the coffin to be carried at a dignified level, nice and level, and he was close to his cousins. So did the coffin not leave the house in a very dignified way, and they went to the graveyard. And I tell you, a little bit long, but it's almost finished. They went to the graveyard, but in those days, in the old countries, I think it might have happened in Brittany too, the doctors in the big towns, the surgeons, when they were training, they needed dead bodies to practice surgery on, the medical students and so on. So there were people in the community with a very important job, and that was grave robbing. So the bodies were robbed out of the graves. So in Donegal, they had a very good idea. We will build a big high wall round every graveyard, and we will put no door in it. So if people want to go to the graveyard, they have to climb up on the wall and down the other side. And if you have to take flowers, then you just throw the flowers over, and then you follow the flowers, and hopefully they'll be okay when they hit the ground. And you go in and put them on the grave, and then you have to climb back out again. So they all reached the graveyard, and of course Brian was invited. He was so important in this funeral that he had to be there. So they all went to the graveyard, and the first lot of men, they climbed up on the wall, then down the other side. Another group of men, they climbed up on the wall, and they lifted the coffin up and passed it down to the other side. Then they pulled up the widow and all of the ladies, and then, of course, the guest of honour, the man who had been their fiddler, their priest, their doctor. They raised him up on the wall, and when they got him up on the top of the wall, a big gust of wind came, and it blew him up in the air. And he blew to the north and back again, the south and back again, the east and back again, and the west and back again, and he came down to earth with a bump and found himself lying on the ground beside a well with a bucket with no water on the outside. And he got up and he lifted the bucket and he went to the door, which opened itself as if by magic. And there inside was the old woman and the old man sitting at the fire. And the woman said, "Be sure not to spill any water on my floor." And he said, "No, it's good and dry." And he went in. He was confused. He went in and they said, "Now, we'll have one more cup of tea and then we go to bed. Brian, are you sure you don't have even one story for us?" Well, do you believe this? Brian told them a story. It's one you know. And they agreed. The old man and the old lady, they agreed it was the best story of the night. And so Brian would be allowed to sleep in grandfather's feather bed. And he was taken through to the back of the house to a good room that they kept only for special guests. And there was a big wooden bed with a feather mattress and feather pillow and a big a blanket to cover the and they put him into the bed and he reached up and he put out the candle and woke in an instant. And there he was, lying, sleeping with his head not on a feather pillow but on a big pile of willow rods. So he got up and he took the willow rods and he bound them up and he carried them back home to Bar on Geich. And all that winter he made baskets. And then from the next summer onwards, from the next May Day onwards, at the fairs of Ireland, people would rush to see Brian, not just to fight over his baskets, but to hear his stories. And he became known as Brian O'Branigan, master basket maker and one of the best storytellers in Ireland.
Beautiful
Wow.
That's one of about 4 of a repertoire for funerals I do. And they love it. Especially the Donegal people, because they know these places. And there are a few other Gaelic words that fit in the longer version, of course. And they all are first language Gaelic speakers. So, but they speak English as well.